Maria Santos never thought her morning coffee would be her last normal moment for weeks. The 28-year-old Army medic sat in the small mess tent at Forward Operating Base Liberty, watching the sun rise over the dusty streets of Fallujah. It was November 2004, and the city had become one of the most dangerous places on Earth. She stirred her coffee and looked at the mission briefing in front of her. Today's patrol would take her unit through the Eastern District, where intelligence reports suggested insurgent activity had increased. Maria had been in Iraq for 8 months, but something felt different about this morning. The usual chatter among soldiers was quieter, more focused. "Santos, you ready for this?" called out Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, her patrol leader. Maria nodded and grabbed her medical bag. As the unit's only medic, she knew her teammates depended on her skills. She had already saved 3 lives during her deployment, earning respect from even the toughest soldiers. The convoy of 4 Humvees rolled out at 0800 hours. Maria sat in the second vehicle, constantly scanning the streets through her window. Fallujah looked like a ghost town. Most civilians had fled the city weeks ago when Operation Phantom Fury began. The few people they saw quickly disappeared into doorways and alleys. Their mission was simple: check on a suspected weapons cache in an abandoned school building. Intelligence suggested the building was empty. But in Fallujah, nothing was ever certain. The convoy moved slowly through narrow streets lined with damaged buildings and debris. "Contact left." The radio crackled with urgency. Maria's heart jumped as she saw muzzle flashes from a rooftop. The convoy immediately stopped, and soldiers poured out of the vehicles to take defensive positions. This was supposed to be a routine patrol. But routine didn't exist in Fallujah. The firefight started small but quickly escalated. What began as a few shots turned into a full ambush. Insurgents had positioned themselves in multiple buildings, creating a deadly crossfire. Maria found herself pressed against a concrete wall, listening to bullets whistle overhead. "Medic! We need a medic!" The call came from across the street. Private Johnson had been hit in the leg. Maria looked at the open space she would have to cross. Bullets were still flying, but her training kicked in. She grabbed her bag and sprinted across the street, diving behind a burned-out car. Johnson was bleeding badly, but the wound wasn't life-threatening. Maria quickly applied pressure and bandaged the injury while bullets continued to fly around them. "You're going to be fine," she told him, though she wasn't sure any of them would make it out. The ambush had been carefully planned. Insurgents blocked both ends of the street, trapping the patrol in a killing zone. Radio calls for backup went out, but help was 20 minutes away. In a firefight, 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Maria moved from soldier to soldier, treating wounds and keeping her team alive. She had never been in such an intense battle. Her hands shook as she worked, but her training kept her focused. Every medic learned to work under pressure, but this was beyond anything she had experienced in training. The shooting suddenly stopped. An eerie silence fell over the street. Sergeant Rodriguez used hand signals to communicate with his team. Everyone knew this wasn't over. Also, the silence was probably just insurgents repositioning for another attack. "We need to move," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. "They're going to hit us again." The plan was to reach the school building, where they could establish a better, defensive position. It was 50 yards away, but those 50 yards looked like 50 miles. Maria helped Johnson to his feet. 2 other soldiers had minor wounds, but everyone could still move. The team prepared to make a run for the school building. They would move in 2 groups, with Maria in the second group to provide medical support if anyone got hit during the dash. The first group made it safely. Now it was Maria's turn. She took a deep breath, grabbed her medical bag, and prepared to run. Johnson was moving slowly because of his leg wound, so Maria stayed close to him. They made it halfway to the building when the shooting started again. This time, the insurgents were ready for them. The volume of gunfire was overwhelming. Maria pushed Johnson toward the school entrance and felt something hit her shoulder, then her leg, then her chest. The world started spinning as she realized she had been shot multiple times. She collapsed near the school entrance, blood spreading across her uniform. The pain was incredible, but she forced herself to stay conscious. Other soldiers dragged her inside the building, but the shooting continued outside. They were surrounded, and Maria was badly wounded. "How bad is it?" she asked, though she could already tell from the faces around her. She had been hit by 15 bullets. Some had passed through. Others were still inside her body. She was losing blood fast, and without immediate medical evacuation, she wouldn't survive. The radio calls became desperate. "We have a medic down. Multiple gunshot wounds. We need immediate case vac." But the streets were too dangerous for a helicopter landing. The insurgents controlled the area, and any rescue attempt would result in more casualties. Maria drifted in and out of consciousness as her teammates worked to stop the bleeding. She had always been the one saving lives. But now, she was the one who needed saving. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even in her weakened state, outside, the battle raged on. The patrol was trapped in the school building with limited ammunition and a critically wounded medic. Radio communications indicated that multiple insurgent groups had joined the fight. What started as a simple patrol had become a major engagement. As darkness fell, Maria's condition worsened. She had lost a dangerous amount of blood, and infection was becoming a serious concern. Her teammates did their best with basic first aid, but she needed surgery and blood transfusions that weren't available in their current situation. The night brought new challenges. Insurgents probed the building's defenses, looking for weak points. Every few hours, gunfire would erupt as they tested the Americans' resolve. Maria's teammates took turns watching over her while maintaining security around the building. By the second morning, Maria was barely conscious. Her body was fighting multiple infections from the bullet wounds, and her breathing had become labored. The radio calls for help continued, but rescue operations were being planned carefully to avoid additional casualties. Unknown to Maria and her trapped patrol, Navy SEALs had been tasked with a rescue mission. The elite special operations team was preparing to infiltrate Fallujah and extract the wounded medic and her teammates. But first, they had to locate the exact building and plan an approach that wouldn't result in a massacre. Maria's second day in the school building felt like a nightmare that wouldn't end. Her body temperature kept rising and falling as infections spread through her wounds. Sergeant Rodriguez knelt beside her, trying to keep her awake and talking. He knew that if she fell asleep now, she might never wake up. "Talk to me, Santos," he whispered. "Tell me about home." Maria's voice was weak, but she forced herself to speak. She told him about her family in Texas, her younger brother who wanted to join the army, and her plans to become a nurse after her deployment ended. Talking helped her stay conscious, but each word required enormous effort. The other soldiers in the patrol had established defensive positions throughout the building. Private Johnson, despite his leg wound, had taken point at the main entrance. Corporal Williams watched the back exit, while Specialist Davis monitored radio communications from the second floor. Everyone knew their lives depended on keeping insurgents out while waiting for rescue. Radio chatter brought mixed news. Command confirmed that a rescue operation was being planned, but the tactical situation remained extremely dangerous. Insurgent forces had reinforced their positions around the school building, making any rescue attempt incredibly risky. The area had become a fortress, controlled by enemy fighters. Maria's medical condition was deteriorating rapidly. Without proper surgical instruments, her teammates couldn't remove the bullets still lodged in her body. They had used all available bandages and were tearing strips from their own uniforms to dress her wounds. Blood loss remained critical, and they had no way to provide the transfusions she desperately needed. "I can't feel my legs," Maria whispered during one of her lucid moments. Rodriguez checked her lower body and realized that one of the bullets had damaged her spinal cord. Even if they rescued her, she might never walk again. But first, they had to keep her alive long enough for rescue to arrive. The insurgents changed tactics on the second day. Instead of direct assault, they began a psychological warfare campaign. Loudspeakers played messages in Arabic and broken English, demanding the Americans surrender. They promised safe passage for everyone except Maria, whom they wanted to capture alive for propaganda purposes. "We know you have a wounded woman," the voice echoed through the streets. "Give her to us, and the rest of you can go home." The message was repeated every few hours, each time with increased urgency. Rodriguez and his team never considered the offer for even a moment, but the constant psychological pressure added stress to an already impossible situation. Night brought new horrors. Insurgents began using different tactics to break the Americans' resolve. They threw rocks at the building's windows and set off small explosives nearby to prevent anyone from sleeping. The goal was to exhaust the defenders until they made mistakes that could be exploited. Maria hallucinated frequently now. Sometimes, she thought she was back home in Texas, working at the hospital where she had trained before joining the army. Other times, she believed she was treating wounded soldiers in a field hospital. Her teammates played along with whatever reality her mind created, knowing that keeping her calm was essential for her survival. "The helicopters are coming," she mumbled during one episode. "I can hear them." But the only sounds outside were gunfire and explosions. Rodriguez held her hand and agreed with whatever she said. There would be time for truth later, if they all survived this ordeal. Communications with command became increasingly urgent. Intelligence reports showed that insurgent reinforcements were arriving in the area. What had started as a local ambush was evolving into a major battle. The longer the rescue was delayed, the more dangerous it became for everyone involved. Meanwhile, across the city, a Navy SEAL team was preparing for one of the most challenging rescue missions of the Iraq War. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had led dozens of operations in urban environments. But this mission presented unique challenges. The target building was surrounded by hostile forces, and they had to extract a critically wounded person who couldn't move under her own power. The SEAL team studied satellite imagery and drone footage of the area. They identified 3 possible approach routes, each with significant risks. The direct approach offered the fastest access, but would require fighting through heavily defended positions. Alternative routes took longer, but might allow them to reach the building undetected. "We go in quiet," Morrison decided. "Fast and silent until we reach the building. Then we fight our way out if necessary." The team would infiltrate on foot through the Eastern District, using abandoned buildings and underground passages to avoid insurgent patrols. Once they reached the school, they would have to fight a potentially massive battle to extract Maria and her teammates. Back in the school building, Maria's condition reached a critical point. Her pulse was weak and irregular, and she was losing consciousness for longer periods. Rodriguez realized they were running out of time. Even if rescue arrived in the next few hours, she might not survive the extraction and transport to medical facilities. "Stay with us, Santos," Davis called from his position upstairs. "We're not leaving without you." The promise echoed through the building, a commitment that every soldier understood. No one gets left behind, regardless of the cost. It was more than military doctrine. It was a sacred bond between warriors. The third insurgent attack came just before dawn on the second day. This assault was different from the previous probing attacks. Heavy gunfire erupted from multiple directions, and explosions shook the building's foundations. The insurgents had brought heavier weapons and were making a serious attempt to overrun the American position. Williams took shrapnel in his arm when an RPG exploded near his position. Johnson's leg wound reopened during the firefight, but he continued manning his post. Davis called in artillery support, but friendly fire wasn't possible with insurgents so close to the building. The patrol was on their own. Maria regained consciousness during the battle. The sound of gunfire and explosions penetrated her fever-induced haze, bringing her back to the terrible reality of their situation. She tried to sit up but couldn't move without excruciating pain shooting through her body. "How long have we been here?" she asked Rodriguez during a brief lull in the fighting. When he told her it had been almost 2 days, she couldn't believe it. Time had become meaningless in her condition. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like days. She wondered if rescue would ever come, or if they would all die in this abandoned school building. The insurgents retreated after an hour of intense fighting, but everyone knew they would return. Radio communications indicated that enemy forces were regrouping for another assault. This pattern of attack and withdrawal was designed to wear down the defenders until they ran out of ammunition or made fatal mistakes. Rodriguez checked their supplies during the quiet period. Ammunition was running low, medical supplies were almost exhausted, and they had no food or water left. Even if Maria somehow survived her wounds, the rest of the patrol would soon face serious problems. Dehydration and exhaustion were becoming factors in their ability to fight effectively. Movement to the north, Davis reported from his upstairs position. Through his scope, he could see figures moving between buildings several blocks away. They appeared to be wearing different equipment from the local insurgents, but he couldn't identify them clearly in the pre-dawn darkness. The movement turned out to be a reconnaissance team scouting the area for the main rescue force. Navy SEALs were finally approaching the school building, moving carefully through the dangerous streets of Fallujah. They were still hours away from reaching Maria and her teammates, but help was finally coming. Maria didn't know about the approaching rescue team. She was barely conscious, fighting infections and blood loss, while her teammates maintained their desperate defense. Her breathing had become shallow and irregular, and Rodriguez feared she wouldn't last much longer. The race between rescue and death was entering its final phase. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison crouched in the shadows of a destroyed mosque, studying the school building through his night vision goggles. His 6-man SEAL team had spent 4 hours moving through Fallujah's deadly streets, avoiding insurgent patrols and navigating through ruins. Now, they were finally within striking distance of their target. "I count at least 20 hostiles around the perimeter," whispered Petty Officer First Class Tommy Chen, the team's sniper. "They've got machine gun positions on the rooftops and RPG teams in the surrounding buildings." The tactical situation was even worse than intelligence had indicated. The insurgents had turned the area around the school into a fortress. Morrison studied his options. A direct assault would be suicide, but time was running out for the wounded medic inside the building. Radio intercepts indicated that insurgent commanders were planning a final assault at dawn, just 2 hours away. If they didn't extract the patrol before then, everyone would likely die in the upcoming battle. "We go through the underground tunnel system," Morrison decided. During their approach, they had discovered that Fallujah's old sewer tunnels connected to the school's basement. It would be dangerous and difficult, but it offered their best chance of reaching the building undetected. The team moved to a drainage entrance 3 blocks away. Chen would remain in overwatch position to provide sniper support when they exited the building with casualties. The other 5 SEALs would infiltrate through the tunnels and extract the entire patrol. Inside the school building, Maria was barely alive. Her pulse was weak and thread-like, and she hadn't spoken coherently in hours. Rodriguez held her hand while monitoring the radio for any news of rescue operations. The patrol's ammunition was nearly exhausted, and everyone knew the next insurgent attack would probably be their last. "Contact to the west," Johnson reported from his position. "I see movement in the building across the street." The insurgents were positioning for another assault. This time, they had brought even more fighters and heavier weapons. The Americans wouldn't be able to survive another battle like the previous one. Rodriguez made the decision to break radio silence and send a final message. Any station, this is Blackwater 7. We are surrounded and running out of time. Medic is critical. If rescue is coming, it needs to happen now." The transmission might give away their exact position, but it no longer mattered. Without immediate help, position security was irrelevant. Unknown to Rodriguez, Morrison's team was already inside the tunnel system beneath the school. The sewers were partially collapsed and filled with debris, forcing the SEALs to crawl through narrow spaces while carrying full combat equipment. The conditions were horrible, but they pressed forward knowing that lives depended on their speed. "I can hear voices above us," Morrison whispered into his radio. They were directly under the school building now. But finding the exact entrance to the basement would be challenging. The building's blueprints were decades old, and combat damage might have changed the internal structure significantly. Morrison's breacher, Petty Officer Second Class Mike Rodriguez, ironically sharing a last name with the patrol leader above, located what appeared to be a maintenance access point. Using specialized tools, he carefully cut through the metal grating while trying to minimize noise that might alert insurgents or startle the trapped Americans. The breakthrough came just as the insurgents began their final assault. Heavy gunfire erupted around the school building as Morrison's team climbed through the basement access point. The timing was perfect and terrible simultaneously. They had reached the building just as the most dangerous battle was beginning. "Americans! Don't shoot! Navy SEALs!" Morrison called out as his team moved up the basement stairs. The response was immediate relief from the trapped patrol members. After 2 days of isolation and desperation, professional rescuers had finally arrived. Morrison quickly assessed the tactical situation. The building was under heavy attack from multiple directions. Ammunition was almost exhausted, and they had one critically wounded person who couldn't move independently. Extraction would require fighting their way through dozens of insurgents while carrying a casualty. "How bad is she?" Morrison asked Rodriguez, referring to Maria. One look told him everything he needed to know. The medic was dying from blood loss and infection. She needed immediate surgery and intensive care that wouldn't be available until they reached a major medical facility. Every minute of delay reduced her chances of survival. "Chen, we need immediate fire support on the buildings to the north and east." Morrison radioed to his sniper. The distinctive crack of Chen's rifle answered immediately, followed by reports of insurgent casualties. The SEAL sniper was systematically eliminating enemy machine gun positions and RPG teams. Morrison's team moved with practiced efficiency. 2 SEALs took over defensive positions, while the others prepared Maria for transport. They had specialized medical equipment that the patrol lacked, including blood clotting agents and stronger pain medications. But even with their advanced supplies, Maria's condition remained critical. "We're going to get you out of here," Morrison told Maria during one of her brief moments of consciousness. She looked at him with confused eyes, unsure if he was real or another hallucination. The SEAL commander's voice was calm and confident, but his expression betrayed concern about her chances. The extraction plan required precise timing. Chen would provide covering fire while Morrison's team moved Maria and the wounded patrol members to an evacuation point 6 blocks away. Helicopter support was standing by, but the landing zone had to be secured before the aircraft could safely approach. "Moving in 30 seconds, Morrison announced. His team had rigged the school building with explosives to deny the insurgents any satisfaction from capturing their position. Once everyone was clear, the building would be destroyed to eliminate any tactical advantage it might provide to enemy forces. The movement began under cover of intense suppressive fire. Chen's sniper rifle and Morrison's team weapons created a corridor of deadly, accurate fire that forced insurgents to take cover. The Americans moved as fast as possible while carrying Maria on an improvised stretcher made from combat gear. Maria regained consciousness during the movement. Through her pain and confusion, she realized that rescue had finally come. Professional soldiers were carrying her through dangerous streets while fighting off attacks from multiple directions. The sound of gunfire was constant, but it was now coming from American weapons defending her, instead of insurgent weapons trying to kill her. "Stay with us, Santos," Morrison called out as they moved through an alley. "We're almost to the extraction point." Maria tried to respond but couldn't form words. Her body had been pushed beyond its limits, and only her will to survive was keeping her alive now. The helicopter landing zone was a small courtyard surrounded by damaged buildings. Morrison's advance team had cleared the area and established security, but insurgents were converging on the location. The extraction helicopter would have only minutes on the ground before enemy fire became too dangerous. "Dust off inbound, 2 minutes," came the radio call. The medical evacuation helicopter was approaching fast and low, using buildings to mask its approach from insurgent positions. The pilot was taking enormous risks to reach the wounded medic, but that was what helicopter crews did. They flew into danger to save lives. Maria heard the helicopter's rotors before she saw the aircraft. The sound represented salvation, a return to the world of advanced medical care and safety. But she also knew that her teammates were risking everything to get her to that helicopter. The responsibility felt overwhelming in her weakened condition. The helicopter landed in a storm of dust and debris, while Morrison's team provided security around the landing zone. Enemy gunfire increased as insurgents realized their opportunity to inflict casualties was rapidly disappearing. The next few minutes would determine whether everyone made it out alive. "Go! Go! Go!" Morrison shouted, as his team carried Maria toward the helicopter. The aircraft's crew chief was already prepared to receive casualties, and the onboard medic had advanced life support equipment ready for immediate use. Maria was loaded onto the helicopter within seconds. The wounded patrol members followed quickly. Johnson's leg wound had worsened during the extraction, and Williams needed treatment for his shrapnel injuries. Davis and Rodriguez were exhausted but uninjured, grateful to finally be leaving the nightmare of the past 2 days. Morrison's team was the last to board the helicopter. As the aircraft lifted off, the SEAL commander remotely detonated the explosives in the school building. The structure collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, denying the insurgents their tactical prize and marking the end of the battle. During the flight to the medical facility, Maria drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness. The helicopter's medic worked frantically to stabilize her condition, while the aircraft raced toward the hospital. Her vital signs were weak, but she was alive, and finally receiving the advanced medical care she needed. "You made it, Santos," Rodriguez told her, as medical personnel took over her care at the hospital. "You survived 15 bullets and 2 days in hell. You're the toughest medic I've ever known." Maria smiled weakly before the anesthesia took effect for her emergency surgery. The surgery lasted 8 hours. Doctors removed bullet fragments, repaired damaged organs, and fought the massive infections that had developed during her ordeal. Maria survived the operation, but her recovery would take months of rehabilitation and multiple additional surgeries. Maria never walked normally again. The bullet that damaged her spinal cord left her with permanent mobility challenges. But she was alive, and that was more than anyone had dared hope during those desperate hours in the school building. Years later, Maria became a nurse as she had always planned. She specialized in trauma care, using her experience to help other victims of violence and accidents. The 15 bullet wounds left scars on her body, but they also left her with an unbreakable determination to help others heal. Lieutenant Commander Morrison and his SEAL team received commendations for their rescue mission, but they always said the real hero was Maria Santos, the medic who survived impossible odds and refused to give up even when death seemed certain. Her story became legend among military medical personnel, proof that courage and determination could overcome even the most desperate circumstances.